Hey there. So this next unit that we're going to talk about is about what's called the gas laws. Okay, and these are the laws that kind of govern how gases behave. When you're talking about gases, there are a few variables that are important to be familiar with, and some of them you're already familiar with. The three big ones: pressure, temperature, and volume. You already have a good sense of what temperature is, right? And I mean, in science, we don't measure temperature in Fahrenheit. We'll use Celsius, but we'll talk about that later when it's more relevant, right? Volume, you're used to. We've measured volume in the lab. We know what volume is. We measure it in liters or in milliliters, right? But pressure is kind of a new concept for us in chemistry. So that is the subject of our first lesson here, pressure. And our target is to be able to convert between different units of pressure. So let's go ahead and let's talk about pressure. So pressure is kind of a measurement of how hard a gas presses on the walls of its container. So think about, maybe think about a balloon, right? And there's a gas inside of the balloon, and the gas inside of the balloon is going to push on the outside, on the surface of on the inside surface of the balloon. And how hard it's pressing there is what we call the pressure, right? Pressure, the standard unit we use for pressure is called the Pascal. It's abbreviated PA. But there are many different units of pressure that are commonly used to measure pressure. Let's talk about some of them here, okay? The first kind of thing that I want to talk about. I'm going to tell the story about a guy who invented the barometer here. And the story is important because there's some numbers that are in the story that are going to become important in a minute, okay? A barometer is a device used for measuring the pressure, air pressure, right? The guy in the picture here is holding a barometer. This man, his name was Torricelli. Torricelli was a man who lived in the 1600s, and he is the inventor of the barometer. Okay, Torricelli noticed that water pumps could raise water up to a height of 34 feet, but never any higher. And he wondered why. Why can they only raise water up 34 feet and not any higher than that? He wondered about that. He thought about that, and he thought it might have something to do with how the weight of the water compared to the weight of the air. And he reasoned that mercury is 14 times as dense as water, so mercury should be able to be raised only about 1/14 of the height that water could. And that 1/14 of that height would be about 760 millimeters. That's the important number that we're going to get to in a minute. 760 millimeters of mercury. And he tested this idea. He took a sealed tube and he placed it in a dish of mercury, and sure enough, the mercury raised up the tube just that height that he was looking for, about 760 millimeters. And this kind of experiment that he did is really just what a barometer is for measuring the pressure of a gas, right? So here he invented the pressure of a gas, and there are a few units that come out of that experiment that he did that are commonly used units of pressure. One of the more common units of pressure is what's called millimeters of mercury. It's abbreviated mmHg, and you can see why we use millimeters of mercury as a unit for pressure because of how a barometer works. 1 millimeter of mercury is also called a torr, in honor of Torricelli, right? So a torr and a millimeter of mercury are about the same thing. The air pressure around you in your everyday life is about 760 millimeters of mercury, or about 760 torr. Another very common unit for pressure is called the atmosphere, abbreviated ATM. The air around you every day has a pressure of about 1 atmosphere. So 1 atmosphere of pressure is equal to about 760 millimeters of mercury, or about 760 torr. Now, the standard unit that we use for pressure is called the Pascal. It's abbreviated PA. A Pascal is a very small amount of pressure. An atmosphere is equal to 101,300 pascals. So, 1 atmosphere is the same as 101,300 pascals, which is the same as 760 millimeters of mercury, which is the same as 760 torr. But because a Pascal is such a small amount of pressure, oftentimes people will use kilopascals, abbreviated kPa. And so 1 atmosphere is about 101.3 kilopascals, which is 101,300 pascals, which is 760 millimeters of mercury, which is 760 torr. And then because we as Americans can't use the same units as anybody else in the world, here in the United States we often use pounds per square inch. And 1 atmosphere of pressure, the pressure around you every day, is equal to about 14.7 psi, pounds per square inch, which is, of course, 101,300 pascals, 101.3 kilopascals, 760 millimeters of mercury, 760 torr. Right? Is that enough numbers yet? So there are other units of pressure. There are lots of units of pressure. There are so many units of pressure. I haven't even mentioned centimeters of water, bar, millibar. I mean, we're not going to go overboard here. We're just going to kind of limit ourselves to these 6 units of pressure, right? And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to convert between them, okay? It's going to be important for us to be able to convert between the different units. And it's really quite easy to do so, and you already know the process for doing so. You're going to recognize it immediately as we start to do it. So let's go look at an example for how to convert between units of pressure. All right, so maybe the problem says, the average atmospheric pressure in Denver is 0.83 atmospheres. Express this in millimeters of mercury. So what I'm going to do, here's how I'm going to solve this problem, okay? You're going to recognize this process right away. I'm going to take that number that they gave me to start with, that was 0.83 atmospheres, and I'm going to write it over 1. Then I'm going to set up a second fraction. Now to set up the second fraction, I'm going to look at these numbers here, and I'm going to pick 2 of them, okay? I'm going to pick 1 to go on the bottom and 1 to go on the top. Which one should I put on the bottom? The one that I should pick to go on the bottom should be the one that's in atmospheres, ATM. So which number there has an ATM following it? It says 1 ATM, right? Okay. And then the number that I'm going to put on top is going to be the one that has the unit that they asked me to find. And the question asked me to find how many millimeters of mercury is this? How many mmHg? So let's look at those numbers and find mmHg and see how, what's that number there. And if you can see, it says 760. So on top I'm going to put 760 mmHg. Right? You can see this unit cancels. And now I have what they asked me to find. They said, how many millimeters of mercury is this? Now I have millimeters of mercury. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the math and I'm going to work that out. I'll grab my calculator. And here I have 0.83 times 760. You may also have a number here to divide by, but in this case it's just 1. So here I have 0.83 times 760. And I get about 630, and that would be mmHg, millimeters of mercury. And that's it. Pretty easy, huh? Okay, another example here says, the pressure in a car tire is 35 psi. Express this number in torr. Okay, so I'm going to start with this number that they gave me, 35 psi. And I'm going to write it over 1. Okay, now let's go to these numbers and let us find the number that is psi. Which number is psi? You can see there 14.7 psi. So let me put that number on the bottom here. And then the question asked me to change that into torr. So let me go and find the number that's in torr and put that on the top. Okay, and then my PSIs cancel. And I have the unit they asked me to find. So let me go ahead and work it out. So I'm going to grab my calculator, and I have, let's see, 35 times 760 divided by 14.7. And there I get about 1,800. And there we go. So pretty easy to convert between units of pressure. So pretty easy lesson there, right? How to convert between different units of pressure. Hopefully that helps us to be able to convert between units of pressure. Yeah, next time we're going to talk about what's called the law of partial pressures. And after that, we'll get on into the various gas laws, like Boyle's law and Charles' law, and we'll learn all of them over the course of the unit. So until then, take it easy.